for the 2020 School Counselor Conferences, and I'm the Senior Assistant Director at Western Carolina. So very glad to have you all here this morning to join us for this special panel session.
Awesome. Thank you, Susie. So once again, welcome. Before we get started, I just want to share a few reminders for not only this session, but our upcoming sessions as well. So first and foremost, we are in Zoom webinar. So you are muted and your camera is turned off. You will be able to ask questions through our Q&A function, which you can actually see at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to submit questions throughout the entire panel and we will answer them live. We do encourage you to submit those questions through the Q&A function and not necessarily through the chat function, even though we will still be monitoring the chat for any questions. But in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, tell us your name and which school that you're representing, because we would love to get to know you guys just a little bit better and know where you're coming from. Now, for all of our counselor programs, we do encourage you to utilize a few resources. So first and foremost, we encourage you to utilize our CACRAO website. That's where you can see the schedule of events for all of our counselor programs, our contact information, as well as all of our agency update videos if you have yet to look at those. For those of you who are still participating, so our Greensboro, Charlotte, and Asheville programs, we encourage you to utilize your counselor exchange programs to meet with various institutional representatives and get your questions answered. And then last but not least, we encourage you to complete the conference evaluation at the end of all of our counselor conferences. That will be sent to you via email, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. Also, all of our participating institutions in our counselor conferences will be providing a one-page institution information sheet for all of our high school counselors. That includes a bit of admissions information, institution information, as well as virtual visit opportunities for you and your students. So feel free to look out for that. And any issues that you have with this week or any questions, feel free to contact us, both Susie and I as your conference co-chairs, but also if you have any questions for your site coordinators, feel free to contact them as well. And you can see everyone's name and email addresses listed on the screen. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and kind of kick off our COVID-19 panel. So as I mentioned, I am joined by some really great colleagues who I am going to allow to introduce themselves before we hop into the questions. And so I am first going to pass it off to Christine Tolbert from Gaston College.
Hi, welcome. I am Chris Ziemba Tolbert from Gaston College. I'm currently an ACA instructor focusing all of my efforts and time with the CCP students and the current students who are at Gaston College regarding transfer.
Hi, good morning. I'm Zelina Staten, a school counselor at D.H. Conley High School in Greenville, North Carolina. So I'm part of Pitt County Schools. And I'm also the VP for the Northeast region of school counselors for the North Carolina School Counseling Association. Glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Mee. I serve as Vice President for Enrollment Management at Campbell University. I've been at Campbell just for about 3 months, but have actually had the honor to work with, I think, several of you in my most recent role. The last 10 years was the Chief Enrollment Officer at Belmont University in Nashville, and about 34 years total working with wonderful high school guidance counselors, and thrilled to be here in North Carolina and to work with you in the coming weeks and months.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sydney Dowd-Smith. I'm the Associate Director of Freshman Admissions at North Carolina A&T State University, and thanks for having me.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Langford. I'm Director of Undergraduate Admissions here at Western Carolina University. I'm a product of North Carolina, born and bred, Wake County high schools, undergraduate and graduate degrees all here in North Carolina, but happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So we are going to go ahead and jump into our pre-submitted questions. And thank you to all of the counselors who submitted questions. We had some fantastic questions that come through, and we're going to try to get through all of them in the hour that we have. But if you are unable to submit your questions, feel free to ask any questions through our Q&A function. And once again, we will be answering those live. So for all of my panelists, I would say the hottest topic that we received questions on was the new test optional policy for all of our North Carolina public institutions, but then also any other institution, whether it be private or not, who has chosen to be test optional for this upcoming year. So the first question I want to ask you guys from our high school counselors is how can they best advise students about test optional for the upcoming application process? When should a student submit their test scores and when should they not? And then last but not least, this is kind of a three-part question. If test scores are within the school profile to be competitive, should an applicant still submit those test scores or not? So I am first going to pass this question over to Miss Sydney. If you don't mind being put on the spot, we would
No problem. Thanks, Courtney. I had a feeling, I was like, she's going to say Sydney, watch. No problem. So great question. So of course, North Carolina A&T for the 2021 recruitment year, we are completely test optional, meaning you do not have to submit test scores at all. So what happens if you do submit test scores, we will not consider it when making an admissions decision. So another kind of two-part that I had in my mind was, you know, if a student got denied and then they wanted to send in test scores, could they? Again, we are completely test optional, so you do not have to submit test scores at all. It will not be required for your application this upcoming year. Of course, we are part of the UNC system, so as we move forward to 2022, we'll kind of see what that looks like, but for the 2021 academic year, we are completely test optional.
Awesome, thanks. Anyone want to add to that?
I was going to jump in. David, go ahead.
Oh, you sure?
Yep.
I'll just add that at Campbell, we are, students do have the option. We're referring to it as Test Flex. So it's a little bit of a slight difference, though certainly give students the opportunity on their application for admission to ask for an initial review of their application without a standardized test score. The admission committee would be in touch if there appears to be an advantage to the student to submit a test score, like we would in a normal deferral process. But we do expect many students to take advantage of Test Flex. We are asking at Campbell, for our purposes, that students, by the time they enroll, should they choose to attend our university, submit an SAT or ACT prior to the fall of 2021, not for a re-review of admission purposes, but for our existing advising, mentoring, orientation purposes. And so we are a residual ACT site for students, so they do have the option, if they need to, even next summer, to schedule a one-on-one residual on our campus.
Yeah, I was just going to add a little bit further. There are some degree programs at some institutions that, while you may be granted admission to the university, they then have a separate process that they have to go through where a test score is going to be required. And we are also, just like Campbell or residual, where they can take it here. But for nursing, for example, there has to be an ACT on file if they're going to look at that as an option. And there's a couple of other degree programs. The way we are treating it here at Western for everybody is to basically say a test is not going to hurt you. It's only going to help you. I'm going to take it one step further because it probably will lead us here at some point. There are some scholarship opportunities that we have on the books that the donor has required that there be a test score. That means if you don't have the test score because the donor may not be in a situation to change that requirement, you would have to have a test score on file. So it's not going to hurt you, it's only going to help you.
Awesome responses, and I think that brings up some great points. And I actually had a question for you, Chris, if you don't mind. So I know community colleges for admissions purposes are typically don't require standardized test scores, but will you still be requiring them in the community college for placements?
That's a great question. We are asking, again, they're not required for admission to the community college. However, students that submit their test scores, that can help them in terms of placement with any RISE, which is the Reinforced Instruction for Student Excellence. Because if their GPA is not at a certain level, their unweighted high school GPA, then we look at their ACT, SAT scores for placement, and if they're needing to have that RISE, which is a supplemental type instruction for math or English. So that's where in some students' cases that their GPA may be a little bit lower, submitting those SAT, ACT scores could be helpful for them.
Awesome. And so I know another question that we had submitted that, Sydney, I want to go back to you because you kind of alluded to it in your previous answer. So let's give you two different options. Let's say a student chooses to submit their standardized test scores and they are denied admission. Can they then be re-reviewed without their standardized test scores? Or vice versa, a student does not submit standardized test scores, is denied admission. Can they then be re-reviewed with test scores? So I guess, does having that test score make a true change in their admissions decision or not when we are test optional this year?
Great question, Courtney. Yeah, so again, so with North Carolina A&T, with or without a test score, it will not give you an advantage, if you will, because some students, they just didn't get the opportunity to take the test, correct? And so we don't want to favor one student who did get the opportunity to take the test and had a test score versus the student who didn't get an opportunity to take the test. So with or without the test, it's not an advantage to your application, but again, we just want students to be competitive because the only thing that we have to view our students this academic year is your GPA and then your course requirements, correct? So a standardized test score, positive or negative, will not affect the student's application at all. And this is very new for us also. So again, coming from an institution who've always required a test score, you know, as we're navigating this is very new for us too. So I'm sure outside of today, you know, questions may arise, you know, with what that looks like further. And then of course, I'll be your point of contact for that. But at this present moment, you know, positive or negative, a test score is not needed.
The only thing, if I may just jump in real quickly, the only thing I might add is we have a great sampling of public, private, 4-year and 2-year institutions in the state here, with many other institutions across the state of North Carolina. Just keeping in mind that some work in a purely rolling admission basis. Others have a decision date, non-binding or binding early decision. And so the timing of a student in making a decision when maybe a testing site does become available and they're wondering, should I go ahead and take it? The answer to that question may be very unique to them based on the institutions they happen to be considering, and whether, you know, it's rolling open opportunity to apply for admission and access to merit-based scholarship opportunities right through the academic year, or are they dealing with a deadline? And the deadline or lack of deadlines can also, I think, probably influence some student decisions too.
Mm-hmm. Selena, so I want to pass a question over to you about test optional. I'm curious to know from our high school counselor on the line, have your students kind of expressed a lot of concern about what test optional really means for our institutions? And how have you been advising them or maybe quelling their fears of test optional truly does mean test optional?
Yes, so we receive a lot of questions from parents and students on wanting to know which, you know, is test optional, but should we still take the test, or, you know, and then also even with some of our juniors, they're not currently seniors, they're looking forward to next year in applying for school. So they want to know more about, should they take the test, should they apply? For schools that I guess are flexible with the with test submission, then it's always to the student's benefit if they fit into that school's profile, if they make a score that would be, you know, to their advantage to submit that score, if the school is allowing, you know, that flex. But I guess for a school like A&T, who's saying, you know, we're not, you know, taking the score into consideration, then, you know, they might just need to submit like their GPA, focus on that, and the classes they are taking for rigor. So those are some of the questions and some of the concerns coming from parents, and we just try to tell them, like, if the school is flexible, then submit those scores if it's to your advantage.
Awesome, thank you. So I see that we've been getting a few questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask one more question to Mike, and then we can hop into those live questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to continue to submit them. But Mike, I wanted to hop back to you based on a response you gave to an earlier question about standardized test scores still may be required for particular scholarships within a particular institution. But we've also gotten questions about honors programs or scholars programs. Are standardized test scores still going to be required for those programs, or those kind of merit-based programs within an institution? Will they also be test optional?
So we've met with the Dean of the Honors College and our Director of Scholarships here, and test scores are not going to be used for admission to those this year. I have to stay within the rules of this year as part of the UNC system. I'm just going to put it out there. We don't know what next year looks like. So we got to live in the here and now. As much as we want to do something, we can't break what that is. So I'm gonna go back real quick. So if you have a junior that's asking, do you need one? Right now, the answer would be yes, you need to plan on doing it. So at some point when it's safe and available. Only people that we can say truly are test optional at this point are the people that are seniors this year applying for fall, spring, summer, or fall entry terms coming up. But for the Dean of the Honors College here, we have one of the largest residential honors colleges in the UNC system. She makes that decision. Nobody in the admissions office makes that decision. All the admittance gets passed to them. But she has assured that there is nobody going to be, she's not going to use the test score at all for admission. So which means it's strictly going to go off on GPA and some any other submittal things that they may need there. So that's the short answer.
Yeah, and I would say, so that's a great answer, and I can say it's very similar at NC State where I currently work. So our honors program, scholars program, PERK scholarship program, they are all test optional as well because we understand that students, had limited opportunities to test. So we never wanted to disadvantage a student in that way. Sydney, did you want to add about A&T's programs?
Yes, thank you, Courtney. So in addition with Mike, so again, our honors program as well will be test optional, no test required. However, as it relates to some of our large full ride scholarship opportunities, so the Cheatham White Scholarship, the Lewis and Elizabeth Dowdy Scholarship, typically what that process looks like, it was one of those scholarships had a nomination form, and so you had to be nominated for it. Also, it's like an interview process. So this year, both of those scholarships will require nomination. And it will be more of a tiered process. So they're definitely going to be looking for those letters of recommendation and different things like that, without having that test score option for this year. And so that speaks to two of those large full ride scholarship opportunities. But again, the honors program aligned with the admissions office will not require a test score as well. And so that's just for you all to keep in mind.
Awesome. And I will say for all of our responses today, of course, this is just a small sample of all of the institutions in North Carolina. So of course, policies may differ from each institution to institution. So we encourage you to, reach out to them, go to their websites, but there definitely are going to be a lot of commonalities among all of us as we're all navigating this new year. So at this time, Susie, I'm going to turn it over to you to read some questions from our Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Courtney. So there's two questions that are kind of in a similar vein to what we've been discussing so far with GPAs and test scores. So I'm going to combine two that we have to make it a couple parts question. So should a student with below average GPA, whether that's weighted, unweighted, but above average test scores, submit them? Is it a situation where that could potentially help if a school is test optional? And then kind of along those lines, with the UNC system's new minimum eligibility requirements of either or, if a student will still need to have at least a 2.5 considering they don't need to send in their test scores. So I guess GPA requirements and test scores and how those all kind of interrelate, especially considering minimum eligibility requirements is sort of the bigger questions going on here.
Nobody's willing. Okay, I'll go.
I was going to take it, Mike, but go ahead.
I'll bite. Sydney, back me up. And
okay.
So anyway, so for the new minimum eligibility requirements, we need to make sure we use the right terminology. So they used to be MARs, they're now MERs. And that is a better description because it's basically, think of it, we use lots of analogies, but think of a couple of hurdles. There are things that you have to get over first to be considered. And I think when they used to be called MARs, people assumed, well, that's all I have to have and I'm in. Mm-hmm. That's not the case. So the eligibility means reached the first hurdle of, yes, you can basically send in the application for admission and be considered. I'm really going out on line here. I'll speak for the 16 of us, in that just basically says, yes, I have a ticket and I want to see if I can go to your institutions. And then what happens is the institutions set their priorities and standards from there. So I can tell you a 2.5 here at Western would not be a very competitive GPA. Now, if somebody came in with a perfect score, a 30 something on the ACT or 1600, would we consider them? We would. Here at Western, though, the GPA is a better indicator of success for our students. So I won't say we would not consider a student that would fall in that, but there would have to be some very strong reasons why the GPA would be what that would be. So I don't know if that answered that portion, but that's the reason the MAR switched to the MER. And when they switched that and to or, basically think of it this way: it gave the institutions a lot more latitude to consider different types of students. And so we are appreciative of that little switch from an and to an or.
Mike, I think that was a perfect example, perfect analogies. It was awesome. In addition, so like Mike said, that 2.5 just gives you the ticket, but it doesn't necessarily, gives you the admittance into the university. So at North Carolina A&T, we're a highly competitive school in general. So I'll share with you, last year, we received over 26,000 applications, admitted about 9,000 students, and my freshman class was a little over 2,200 coming up this, 2020? Yeah, fall 2020. So that just speaks to the competitiveness of the university. So that 2.5 at A&T is not considered competitive. We definitely want our students to be extremely competitive. And so what that's going to look like for this upcoming year is I'm looking at that GPA for sure. Of course, I'm looking at the coursework. Did you complete the minimum course requirements, right? So that's very, very important. So, in light of COVID, test optional it could be in a student's benefit or it could not. It really just depends. But, as a system, a part of the USC system, we're navigating in a uniform, meaning, that student who had a 2.5 probably had a perfect SAT or ACT, what would that look like? But unfortunately, this year, we're solely looking at that GPA. And like Mike said, we want to ensure that our students are on campus to be successful. And GPA, a lot of the times, is an indicator of what success will look like for a student at a four-year institution. So perfect answer, Mike. Perfect answer.
Thank you.
I might just add real quickly, with the sort of the test flex environment here at Campbell and perhaps other institutions, we don't publish minimum GPAs perhaps in the same way that a state system might. But at the same time, I think it's fair to say that students who might be a bit more on the fence in terms of high school GPA could be helped by opting to submit a strong standardized test to balance it. And that's where our admission counselors will certainly get into the individual situations with students. But it is indeed possible that it's wise for a student to opt to submit a standardized test score in our case.
And Mike, I just want to go back to you really quickly for a point of clarification that we had asked in the chat. So do you need a 2.5 in order for your application to be reviewed for admission or just eligible for admission? So will you still review students below a 2.5?
We would review them. Everybody will be reviewed. So if somebody makes an application, somebody will set eyes on that application. But really, for serious consideration, it needs to be above the 2.5. So
awesome. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
So now I'm going to pop back into our pre-submitted questions, and I want to talk a little bit about PC-19. So how are colleges and universities going to view PC-19 as a grade? Is it better for students to have the numerical grade on their transcripts? And kind of going off of that, in what situations should a student use PC19 versus maybe a numerical grade?
Okay, I'll take this one. Mike, I got your back. So again, speaking from North Carolina A&T standpoint, when we're evaluating students, we're looking at your cumulative GPA, right? And so if you got an A or B in the class and that can boost your numerical cumulative GPA, of course, I would always say, let's get the A or the B as opposed to the PC19. But again, it's up to you, up to the students and the counselors to make that decision. But, a numerical grade, as long as it's an A or B, affecting your cumulative GPA will always look better than a PC19. But again, at A&T, we're also just looking for that cumulative GPA, and then receiving the credit for the class is also very, very important. Not just the attempt, but the successful completion of the credit of the class. So awesome question, but I think it's depending on your institution. So again, making sure if it's private, public, whatever it is, that you're really understanding what that looks like. And so from a North Carolina A&T standpoint, we're definitely looking for that cumulative GPA, and then we're looking for the credit, the completed credit of the class.
I would like to say, as far as the high schools, I know for Pitt County schools, and I believe for the state, for seniors, we had to give all seniors PC19 for spring 2020. So our students 9th through 11th grade, they had the option, but for our seniors that were already, I guess, going into their college year, they had to get the PC19. But yes, I just wanted to say 9th to 11th grade did have the option of choosing PC19 or the grade.
Go ahead. I was just going to jump in to go back to, so you also have to, when an admissions counselor is looking at a transcript, so there's all types of different scenarios that I'm going to try to put into two or 3 seconds of an answer. But you have to realize, usually we're used to seeing 6 semesters of graded work when somebody applies for admission. You're taking away a whole semester with the PC19, which is fine, but that then puts the ball back in our court, where now we may have to say, we need to see first semester grades to give us one more semester, because if we see a grade pattern that looks like this versus a grade pattern that from 9th grade to the current semester looks like straight up, it gets better and better each semester. That's a easier decision than we have to sit there and kind of weave the story together by just looking at the transcript of what really happened with this student's academic progress. So I made a really broad statement there, but basically the PC19, I would always opt for, if it's in your favor, go for the numeric, if you have the choice.
And Chris, just to get a community college perspective, I'm interested in knowing how you've been advising your students, maybe who are eventually, looking to maybe transfer to a 4-year institution, as we understand that not all students come in through that traditional pipeline.
So students that are taking classes at their local community college, same thing what Mike had just stated, is that if they can get that numerical grade, it could help them as they transfer onto the 4-year institution, especially if it's a particular course that is needed or required for their program. Any student that has that PC19, community college looks at it as they passed it with a C or higher, which is great. But when you're talking about a community college class that will count for transfer credit to a 4-year institution, that's when things start to become a little bit more tricky, and careful attention to those classes and how they will count for transfer to each individual institution the student is considering is really crucial for the student to be looking at and reviewing.
And I think that's a great question then for any of our dual enrollment students. If they elected PC19 at their community college that they were dual enrolled with, does that still count for transfer credit?
It does, as long as they pass the class, and then it's up to the individual institution to determine how they would like to be able to award credit or particulars with that particular course. But from my understanding, as long as the student passed the class, the 4-year institutions with the PC19 will receive credit, transfer credit for that class, as long as it's part of the agreements with those institutions.
Thank you. And Mike, I want to go back to a point that you made, and David, I would love for you to chime in as well. So Mike, you were saying that, when a student, option for numerical grade. It provides a little bit more context to their academic success. But if a student has chosen PC19, should they be providing context on their application as to why they chose to take that grade as opposed to a numerical grade? What our institutions provide or really appreciate that context and a better understanding of what their success looked like? Or should students not provide that additional information?
Oh, okay. So for me, anything that will help explain the story is going to be helpful. If you don't explain it and we have questions, then just know the student's going to get an email that says, I need you to explain it. So you might as well go ahead and submit anything that helps state your case, especially in a year where we're not saying you have to have this, and if you meet these two things, then we can let you in. We've taken one thing away, so now I need a little bit more context to put around the student. So, you know, here in our office, there's individual Zoom sessions. They can sign up with the admissions counselors, and that's at pretty much any institution across the state. There's open chat rooms, and then they can be off into a private conversation. I would suggest for any student to find out who their admissions counselor is, reach out to them and have that, because even just the chat can then put context around what this person is looking at on paper.
And I would echo Mike's comments. I think the the context is very helpful. I think the mere effort that a student took to reach out and provide context, ask questions, explain, and putting on my hat a little bit here of various workshops I've done with parents on the college search process, and the degree to which we can encourage our young people, our students, to do the reaching out, if you know what I mean, I think goes a long way in just helping in the entire transition and having a sense of ownership in the process. Sometimes when you're looking, as you know, I'm talking to all professionals here, but you're looking to try to determine the degree of interest and you know, where we fit in the student's college search process. Being able to communicate directly with the student is very, very helpful. And so these one-on-one video opportunities that many of us offer to prospective students and their parents, I think makes great sense. And so, you know, the more context, the better. And this is a strange world, a strange year in which we live. And so the degree to which our students and parents recognize that we're, as professionals, still talking about all of this and doing aircraft maintenance at 30,000 feet, you know, I think maybe will cause everyone to have some degree of calmness through all of this.
Awesome. Thank you both. So Susie, I'm going to turn it back over to you to see if we got any live questions in the Q&A function.
Yeah, actually, we have a question that is right along these lines in terms of the PC19 classes and explanations, asking about students who maybe chose to take PC19 in an academic class versus taking a numerical grade because they wanted to keep their GPA on the higher side, perhaps, if they didn't want their weighted GPA to be lowered by the academic class. Just wanting to get a few more opinions on this as far as how students need to explain that if they chose to do that in the spring, and just advice for them going forward this year. The counselor who asked the question mentioned that they recommended explaining PC19 classes in, for example, an essay. So if there are any other thoughts on PC19 and, you know, students who may have taken PC19 for an academic class, and what kind of explanations you would prefer for that.
I'll just sum up. The more information, the better for us, especially for, like David just said, we're doing this on the fly too. And we are trying to figure it out. So when, like I just said, you take one thing away, I need something else to help stabilize what's going on. So if there's anything that can, and I get the numbers game, I know how the high school students, I was one, and you're sitting there trying to say, can I get one more quality point to boost it? I get that. And it can get very competitive in certain places. But for us, you got that is part of the ticket to get in, but you have to, that student also has to remember, Once they come on one of our campuses, it's a clean slate. They aren't bringing any of those grades with them. It's just that is what helped them. They are starting all over. So you are going to have to say, how are you going to be successful at X institution with what choices you've made in high school? Remember, it's a process. They got a ticket. We're saying, yes, we want to give you admittance. You got to decide who you want to take up on that and go fly on that plane. So.
And Susie, I kind of want to hop in because we've definitely gotten that question a lot at state about students who are wanting to take PC-19 for maybe their honors or just, regular level classes, and kind of what our advice was on that. And I always tell students, PC-19 is up to a lot of interpretation. So that's an A, B, or C. And so when we see that and, maybe a regular class where a student's really not wanting to affect their GPA or their, whatever it may be, they're playing that numbers game. We look at that and we say, okay, but were you successful in this class? If you have an A or a B, you should be really proud of that grade. And even if you think it's going to bring down that cumulative GPA, you should still want to include that, because once again, that indicates your success in that class. But that PC-19 is left up to a lot of interpretation. And yes, providing context is great, but we do want to see that success on the transcript. So I always encourage students, if you have an A or B, keep the numerical grade. Don't go for PC-19, because we want to know what success looked like for you in that class. And
okay. Oh,
Elena, were you saying something? You are muted. And I'm curious to know if you've had a lot of questions like that from your students too.
Right, so I know during the whole time period with COVID and, deciding on the PC-19 or the grade, there was still a lot of confusion. Parents and students didn't know, even from like 9th graders, 10th graders, they were like, I'm looking ahead. I want to be number one in the class. So if I have this course, and I make this grade, and how I'm going to compare to so-and-so with my GPA. So I do know it was a lot of, concern from students, even going back to that fall semester in their classes. They're like, well, how can so-and-so, they can opt out for PC-19 and not let's say health and PE affect their overall GPA, but I have to have health and PE in my grade point. So it's just a lot of GPA being competitive with that. With some students and with parents. So I just want to say, from the school perspective, it was a lot of confusion, concern, but then also comparing that GPA and wanting to be top in the class. And, if I don't put this PC-19 for this B right here, then how's that going to affect me when I get to my senior year and wanting to be number one in the class? So that's what I heard a lot of during that time period in with students and parents, and trying, to decide, or looking at their courses and doing the PC-19 and taking the grade.
Okay, we have another live question that we talked a little bit about community college transfer pathways so far, but what is your advice to students who are considering community college transfer or a gap year because of the uncertainty of what next year might look like and the potential for continued online learning at a four-year institution?
Great question, thank you. This is just ZT's personal thoughts about whether a student should take a gap year or attend a community college. Without a doubt, attend community college. For the simple fact that the student's able to get acclimated to what college life is actually like and the rigorous difference between high school and college level courses. They're starting to obtain college credits that will assist them when they do transfer to a four-year institution. Part of the GPS pathways that we have now, it's assisting students to get on the right path early on and from the start. It also allows those students to be able to get some of those general education or UGETC courses completed prior to transfer. For some students, a gap year may be what's best for them. But again, I would personally, and again, this is ZT, attending the local community college is a phenomenal step for those students. There are financial opportunities. There's the financial aid that's available to help cover. And if a student is careful with planning, if they do receive financial assistance, they might be able to have enough money saved up to help with costs at the four-year institution. Not all, but some. So again, that would be from the community college perspective.
I guess from the 4-year standpoint, whatever you decide, whatever's best for your family is what I'll say. So when we were admitting students for fall 2020, we did have some students that, hey, I just decided to take a gap year and I'll reapply at a later date. Or, hey, I just decided to go to my local community college and I'll apply again at a later date. We completely understand. I think navigating through the summer and COVID, we didn't know what the fall semester will look like. We didn't know, what in North Carolina, what Governor Cooper would do relating to, mask here, whatever. We had no idea. So I always say whatever's best for your family. Of course, we accept a lot of transfer students. We have, transfer articulation agreements with all of our North Carolina community colleges. So we want it to be a clear and easy pathway for you. And even if you just decide not to do anything that year, just take a break and live and whatever it may be, we support that as well. You want to do what's best for your family. And your financial situation as well. I will tell you, A&T currently, we have 3 test options. So students are hybrid, students are online, and then of course we do have some in-class instruction as well. Now, again, that's just for this fall semester. Of course, we'll reassess it for what the spring semester looks like, but that's just for right now, this fall semester, what that looks like. And, if COVID were to take a different type of turn, I'm sure we would reassess at that time too. But for now, what we have in place works across our campus. And our students are successful in, maintaining social distancing and being healthy across campus too. So whatever is best for you and your family is what I love to tell our students. We won't penalize you for taking that break in a gap year or for going to a community college and then transferring in.
The only thing I might throw in there is just to be aware of, perhaps if you have a 4-year college or university destination in mind, that with some institutions, both in North Carolina and outside, there can be some differences in terms of freshman, first year, and transfer merit scholarships. And so just be aware, just let that be a piece of the decision to say, I was headed to this 4-year institution. I think I'm going to go to a gap year or to a 2-year institution and then transfer. Make sure we remove any surprises about what may or may not be similar, especially in the merit scholarship range.
I'm going to jump in, and what Sydney and David had said is absolutely true. Definitely what's best for the family, for the student. And David mentioned about looking at the scholarships that are available, because there is a difference between freshmen and transfer students currently among the 4-year institutions in terms of scholarships. And also the number of credit hours a student obtains from the time that they've graduated high school. Each 4-year institution has a different set minimum number of credit hours that are needed for a student to be deemed a transfer student. So if a student only goes to a community college and obtains 12 credit hours and then applies to a 4-year institution, they're still going to be deemed a first-year student and being reviewed as a first-year applicant with the other students who are possibly fresh out of high school that did not have any time at the community college beyond high school graduation. So it's a little tricky. And again, it's what's best for the student and for their family as to what's needed. In terms of how community colleges are providing courses this semester and in the future, it's a combination, just like Sydney stated, what A&T is currently doing. We're doing what we can do for best for our students. The classes that need to be in person, we're providing them with social distancing definitely intact, but we're also doing some face-to-face, again, with social distancing, hybrid models, and then fully online. And there's a variety of different options across the community college. And again, it's what's best at that community college to serve their students.
Awesome. So kind of speaking of, what should students do this upcoming year when it comes to deferring their enrollment or taking a gap year? We did have a question come in through our pre-submitted questions in regards to fall 2020 students and how it will impact spring or graduating 2021 students. So the question was, do you think that the number of students who deferred this past year will impact the competitive nature of admissions for all of our 2021 graduates? So David, I see a little smile on your face, so I'm gonna have you take this question first and get your insight on it.
Well, actually, I think it's a great question, and I was pondering a good answer because I think it probably varies quite a bit from institution to institution. I think probably the primary influencer is whether an institution is admitting, shall we say, during their review season all qualified applicants in a sense, regardless of the total, because they're able to ebb and flow in capacity and things of that nature. Or there's essentially a target, even a cap or fixed number on a freshman class, if that makes sense. So I think that as I was pondering that answer, I think that it probably depends on the institution. Probably at Campbell would not negatively impact at all a student who has deferred or was admitted and is reapplying, I guess, for fall of 21, having gone nowhere or perhaps a few hours in preparation to come to the four-year institution. But I wouldn't want to speak for every institution, because if essentially there's a consistent yield rate, the percentage of admitted students who enroll, and an institution is dealing with a maximum cap, and it's putting more students into the top of the applicant funnel, I suppose it could make a difference in some cases, but at others, like at Campbell, probably not.
Yeah, I'll just go for a larger perspective, a little bit larger perspective for a school that's got more students at it that has residential space. Sometimes for people, it comes into how many beds do you have available and different. So there's lots of different things that come into how much space does a school have, and none of us up here can sit there and say it's this way for every institution here in the state. But when we're looking for here, hey, our target is this, that's because we're playing with, okay, we think we're going to get this many applications and we get this many people that we offer admission to. And then it gets more complicated, because then you start seeing how many people are saying yes, and do you have beds to house all those people, and do you have enough faculty lines to teach all those academic majors. And so it gets way complicated really quick. So that's why you have a number. So does it make it more competitive? We had about 100 students here at Western that chose to wait and not come this past fall. So you have to think there's 100 people for next fall already but even then they could change their mind. So it's a guessing game. So, just because they said, yeah, we want to wait, they could decide to stay wherever it is they want. What we did was say, tell us what you're going to do. If you're going to go to a community college, tell us the community college so we know what transcript to expect to see. Yes, it will switch them from a freshman to a transfer type of student. So there's a lot that goes into that, but I agree with David. None of us can give you the same answer.
And to Mike's great comments there are a lot of questions that we can respond to with years, if not decades, of experience and modeling and things of that nature. Like a lot of things we're talking about here this morning, it's a first time for these questions for most of us, if not all of us. So time will tell, but I do think it varies a little bit from institution to institution, in part based on pure capacity matters.
Awesome. So I'm going to go into our last pre-submitted question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Susie, to close us out with our last questions. So if you have any last-minute burning questions, please do submit them through the Q&A function. But Sydney, I'm going to direct this question to you. So how will our universities perceive students taking a less rigorous curriculum due to a lack of inconsistent instruction in the classroom? So for example, let's say a student had chosen to initially enroll in AP Calculus, but their entire class was then moved online. And maybe that virtual learning is not that student's strong suit, so then they chose to do maybe a regular pre-calculus or an honors pre-calculus course. How are our universities going to perceive that? And then once again, where would you provide students to maybe provide a bit of additional context to their choices and their class selection in regards to, COVID and how it's affected students' learning?
Gotcha. That's such a loaded question. So I was like mentally taking notes. So great question. So one thing that I think I've noticed even pre-COVID is that students were taking classes, trying to get the rigor, but sometimes didn't do well, right? And so I think with COVID, since it's all a virtual, platform and different things like that, you know, pick the course that's best for you, right? Do not take an AP or IB if you just personally feel like this online learning environment is not going to benefit you, right? I'd rather you take that honors class because you know it's something that you're going to do well in than to take a class with a lot of rigor that you probably just won't do well in on, you know, online, right? And so how we're going to look at it is, I want to see successful completion of the course. So if you opted to take pre-calculus as opposed to AP calculus, I would much rather prefer you get an A or B in pre-calculus than attempt and then get a C or D, you know, midway through the year. So at North Carolina A&T, how we're looking at it is, I want to see you successfully complete the class, whether it be honors or advanced. Whatever is best for you is how I'll evaluate your application. And in previous years, A&T, we didn't always look at the rigor of the class because you have to think about some schools don't, you know, have AP and IB courses, right? Some schools only have honors or regular. So I didn't want to penalize someone who has these options as opposed to someone who doesn't have those options, right? And so I'm just going to look at the successful completion and the passing credit of the class.
And I would say, kind of going off of that, I know NC State has added a supplemental question to their application asking how students have been, you know, impacted by this pandemic. And I know multiple other universities have also added that question. So, you know, we would encourage students there to disclose maybe their curriculum choices at, you know, online learning wasn't their jam. So they chose to do maybe an honors course instead of an AP course, and really providing that context there. And I think for all of us, that will just help give students a much more equitable review. Also remind your students that no effect is too little. So any way that they've been impacted, please have them disclose, of course, if they feel comfortable in doing so, because once again, I think that will just help with a much more equitable review of all of our students amid these unprecedented circumstances. So at this time, we have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to turn it over to Susie to address our last couple of live questions. So Susie, the floor is yours.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat, and I think we should have time to answer both of these before we hit that 12 o'clock mark. First, do North Carolina students still have the option to change their decisions about PC-19 versus numerical grade? And this could be, Selena, at the high school level or colleges in terms of your admissions timeline. If so, is this something colleges would suggest we talk with students in grades 10 and 11 about?
From the high school level, I have not heard anything in regards to procedures in regards to that. That might be coming down as more parents might be looking at that option. So we might receive more information on that in regards to if a student or parent wanted to go back and change that PC-19 based on, let's say, a college they're applying for. They might have thought about that. So we will get more word when the state tells us.
Anyone have anything they want to add as far as PC-19 and future grades?
I mean, there's, from the university side, I'll just say, you know, that's not something we get to have any input with. So that's more going to come from DPI. That's not something we're going to have any say-so in whatsoever.
Okay, next question, sort of back to the concept of gap year or deferral to take college classes. If a student decides to defer admissions, and they acknowledge that it probably varies by institution, if a student decides to defer admissions, does that mean they would have to reapply to your institution?
I think it is indeed going to vary. Many institutions, well, it's probably a mix. You have some where there's an official deferral and essentially a reoffer of admission, if you will, a year later. I think there are a good number of institutions who ask the student to cancel or withdraw his or her offer of admission with good guidance and good prospects for the likelihood of admission a year later, you know, having gone, let's say, through a gap year. So it probably varies from institution to institution on whether that's an automatic carry through of the offer of admission, or it really is a cancellation withdrawal, if you will, and a reapplication. Having said that, I would imagine that for most institutions in the latter scenario, the reapplication is a fairly straightforward process. The institution already having the high school transcript, or at least standardized test scores, whatever it may be, recommendations, essays, and so on. So it should be a fairly smooth and even more efficient process if the student has to technically apply again.
I'll jump in real quick. For us, we treated it as if they told us they were going to defer, we had a form they filled out and they told us what they were going to do. If they didn't know, they obviously would just leave it blank and go, it carries forward. But if they if they go anywhere and do any work post high school graduation, then they would need to send us a transcript wherever they did the work for it to even be considered for credit. And I'll just go with, it's the same speech I give to seniors. All admissions decisions are conditional until you get there on that campus. So if they bomb this year, there is the possibility that the offer of admission could still be rescinded if they don't perform well at that community college or four-year institution. That's just the nature. I don't want that, and I hate sending that when we have to do that. But you got to think, we're not setting that student up. If they didn't do well this year, we're taking away opportunities for financial aid. We're taking away, because successful completion of program to a degree, if they are eating away at hours, they could be affecting lots of other things down the road.
Okay.
And I would agree with everything Mike said. So you just took the words out of my mouth for sure.
Any other thoughts about that question? Okay, that is it for our live questions as well. So going to turn it back over to Courtney.
Awesome. So once again, thank you to all of our panelists for such a productive and great conversation. And thank you to all of our counselors who submitted not only our pre-submitted questions, but also our live questions. We hope you guys found this session really helpful and got some great insight from it. Before I let you guys go, once again, just want to remind you of all of the resources that we're offering. So please utilize our CACRAO website, the counselor exchange programs to learn more about the specifics of each institution that you're interested in learning more about. And then of course, submitting the conference evaluation so we can continue to make these counselor programs as beneficial for you as we can. But with that being said, thank you so much again for joining us today. And best of luck to you and your students as you continue throughout the academic year and the college search and application process. Thanks, everyone.